Hello, is it me?
It's you.
Is it me? Okay, I suppose I should take over, shouldn't I? Hello, you beautiful bunch of miscreants. Thank you for taking some time to spend with me today, which I hopefully will not bore you to absolute tears with. My goal today is to take you through some of the design principles that sad little geeks like me go through very all early on in our childhoods when we're learning about this stuff. Because you'll have all been hoisted into a career that now requires some design skills from you, and you'll A, either not be interested in that whatsoever, B, you will, but you'll have no idea where to put things. Someone will have just thrown a load of fonts and colors and images at you, and all of a sudden you're expected to know where to place them and how they're going to look good and how people are going to engage with them and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to show you a load of little tricks and techniques today that will allow you to understand how to do these things and get promoted and take over the world and do whatever it is that you're planning on doing. So, I suppose I should show you some slides, right? Rather than my daft face, because that'll be useful. So let me just share up my screen. Da-di-da-di-da. It's going to be very exciting, this, by the way.
I've seen the first slide. It looks great.
Of course, it's not on the screen, because that would be ridiculous. That would be ridiculous to be that prepared, wouldn't it? Okay. So, my name is Dave, as Joe has said. I am a freelance graphic designer and illustrator, and I have called my business Doodle Juice for some reason that I can't quite remember. It was about 15 years ago, but I've grown quite attached to it. So, before we get into all of the nitty-gritty about design principles and we get into the real exciting stuff, I want to make sure you're all properly caffeinated and energized because I'm about to throw a ton of useful information your way. So get your pupils open, get your notes ready, and let's go through some stuff. So before I get into it, you should probably have some idea that I'm actually relatively credible in this area and I have a vague idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show you some work, right? This will take like 5 seconds. I'm going to show you some of the things I do because they're related to logo design and book covers and character illustration and website design and posters and packaging and all this kind of stuff. These are the kind of things that I spend my days doing, but these are the interesting things. Like these are the sexy things to show you. So these are the things that you put on your portfolio. But the vast majority of what I do and what you will probably do is the stuff that's actually quite kind of dull. Like can you make this magazine layout look a little nicer, or can you make this flyer look less vomit inducing? It's the kind of the duller stuff that you don't really show off, but it's the stuff that's still quite important, the stuff that majority of people will see and the stuff we want to get them properly engaged with and show them how things can look quite interesting. So in order to do that, we need to learn design principles of design. I know it's exciting. Please try and contain yourselves. And for the love of God, keep your clothes on because I know how, tantalizing this stuff can get. But I'm going to take you through about 10 different design principles that can help you when you're faced with a load of images and text to understand I've got this blank canvas in front of me, I've got these elements. How am I going to put them all together to make something interesting, visually appealing, and ultimately engaging? So let's go through some of those, right? I've got a little Canva tab open. I thought this would make sense. This will probably be the tool the vast majority of you will use for your designs. So I'm going to bring you into a little environment you're hopefully familiar with and take you through some of these principles. So the first one is balance. Now, when you have a design, let's take something really, really basic, and you've got two lines of text, right? And we have a blank canvas. Where are we going to put the text? Now, the default setting for most people is to plonk something sort of in the center when you have an image, when you have text. You'll plonk it in the middle. You might plonk it in the middle along the horizontal axis. You might even, if you're feeling extra spicy, also plonk it in the center on the vertical axis. Now we've got something bang in the middle, right? Lovely. That's your instinct because it makes sense. It's comfortable, it's centered, it's nice. The reason that it is nice is because it's balanced. Say it with me, balanced. So balance, in other words, refers to the weight distribution. in a design. So this title is equally balanced across the left and the right hand side. It's equally balanced across the top and the bottom. So everything feels nice and lovely and relatable. Now, one thing that can trip people up is whether when you're placing everything in the center, whether we center our text. At the minute, this is left aligned, but you'll have seen people center text, right? This is a little bone of contention for a lot of people. Sometimes text can look lovely. Sometimes it can look a little jarring. And it can be a bit confusing as to why one of those things happens against the other. And there's a pretty simple rule for this, right? If you've got two or three sentences, center aligning text is absolutely fine. When you get over three, or if you go over into a second paragraph, for example, you'll start to notice that it doesn't quite look as neat. Now, there's a reason why novels aren't center aligned. We are obviously, because us in Western societies are built to read from top to bottom, from left to right, we know when we're reading things, when we get to the end of one sentence, our eyes automatically know where to dart to read the next word on the next line. It's really, really simple. And when you're creating design, you want to create as less friction as possible between the reader and the thing you've created. So when you center align text and there's multiple lines, you have to do that little bit of extra work when you're going from the end of one sentence to the beginning of the other one to find where it starts. And yes, it's minimal, but it's a tiny little bit of friction that you're putting in between you and the reader. So it can just make the whole thing a little bit disjointed and make the reading experience a little bit more jarring for the person on the other end. So the general rule of thumb, a nice simple one to remember, is if you're going over three lines or onto a separate paragraph, just left align it like this. If you've got two or three lines, you can center it and it's generally nice and neat, nice and easy. Creating the balance. Another example, if you had a page like this, and imagine this is an image or a photograph at the top, and then you've got this text at the bottom. This is fine, but again, when you are asking something to read something, which is generally what we're doing, again, if you think of a novel, a person has picked up a novel to read in their leisure time, their downtime. They are choosing to read that. They are well aware that this thing has thousands and thousands of words. It's a story they're really interested in. They are committed to reading that. You can pile a ton of words onto people when they're properly engaged in the story and it's something they want to get involved with. If it's something to do with what we're generally creating, we're asking them to read something. If it's a corporate document, for example, right? No one wants to read that. So you need to break it up into a way that looks less imposing as a block of text, also looks visually engaging, and the person isn't going to be instantly intimidated when they look at text. So again, the general rule of thumb with these kind of things, especially the kind of stuff that you or I would be creating is if your block of text is taking over 50% of the real estate on this picture, on this image, on this canvas, sorry, then you want to start breaking it up so it doesn't start to look too imposing. So for this one, for example, I would want to change this because over 50% of my canvas here is text. And I think that looks like a bit too much. So I'm going to want to change it. And a simple way of doing that, again, looking at the balance rule, is just to split it up into two separate columns. You'll see this a lot in magazines and corporate documents and the like. And it's just to make that block, there's the same amount of text there. It just looks a little less imposing because it's been split into two and split across the two different sections of the page. So this is where balance comes in. It's got equal weight distribution on either sides of the canvas, just makes it look a little bit more pleasing, a little less imposing. You can do this with another slight variation, which is called asymmetrical balance. So there's still the same weight on either end, but we've just kind of rejigged the order of what's on the left and what's on the right hand side. And this just makes it look a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting, but it's still the same principle at play. And a few different examples of ads that create a very simple balance with images is this McDonald's ad. You got a flip-flop on either side, excuse me, nicely balanced, and then this piece of art which is balanced nicely again against the horizontal and the vertical axes. So that's a nice easy one. If you want to think of how to make something look decent, the weight, think of just the weight distribution can be just an easy way of tackling that. Next one is contrast. Contrast can be achieved in a few different ways. The first one is color. So if we look at this image, for example, I want to draw attention to this square, so I'm going to make sure that it has a highly contrasted color to the background. Now, this is also an area that people aren't too familiar with, because knowing exactly when something is contrasting can be a little bit tricky, especially because everybody's got different levels of, visual aptitude. So if we look at Netflix's brand guidelines, for example, they show this kind of this gradient of when it's acceptable to use a certain shade of black all the way through to white against the red of their logo. And you'll see when something's 100% black here, that's absolutely fine because there is a huge contrast between the different colors. So it's fine. As you get a little bit grayer, this is also kind of fine. And then when we get into this area, it's a little bit questionable because there's not quite enough contrast. You'll see this contrast ratio thing that they've mentioned here, which I'll show you how to calculate in a second. Where it starts to get a little bit jarring, and then we get into these cleaner whites, and it's really, really clear again. There's that real visual separation. And this can be a tricky thing when you've got colors in your brand guidelines, but not all of them work together. If we look at Duolingo's brand colors, for example, obviously theirs is massively colorful. There's a huge spectrum of colors on their color range. But if we go into the colors they use down here, more for their characters, for example, if I was to use their beak highlight color here and their tongue pink, if I used the pink on the yellow as text, it just wouldn't work. There wouldn't be enough contrast. What you should all be aware of in your own brand guidelines or anything else that you work with is, yes, these are all the colors available to me, but not all of them should be used together. There's a few different ways you can figure that out if just by eyeballing it isn't enough for you. And there's this website called humint.com. This can be a really quick way of sort of seeing what works and what doesn't. If you put all of your hex codes for your colors on these top little color circles, Humint will generate a ton of images for you and it will mock them up in various different scenarios. So you can kind of see at a quick glance what colors work together, what they don't. You can view it on, if I go to the right here, you can view it on magazine layouts, you can view it on website layouts, illustrations, tons of different things. And it's just a quick visual guide as to where my colors can work and where they can't. If that's not helpful, this is a really useful tool, and this is also just for general accessibility for people with visual impairments and things. This website is called webaim.org. Now, if you've got two colors, you've got a background color, you've got a different color you're going to use your text on, go to this site, put the background color in there, the foreground color in there, and it will give you this contrast ratio, the ratio that the Netflix brand guidelines were referring to a second ago. That will show you the contrast that you need. And the only real thing you need to be concerned about are these these little pass codes here. So if you have enough contrast, you'll get a pass. If you don't, you'll get a fail. And it shows you if it passes enough for lightweight normal text, if it passes on large text, and if it passes for graphical objects. If you can get a pass on all of these, you're laughing. Go and create whatever you want to. If you got a pass on just graphical objects and just large text, then just use those two separate colors on the larger elements in your design. And maybe you wait when you're using the smaller copy, just use like a plain white or a black, or depending on what you're working on. So that's just a little tool that is useful to know. Contrast wise, it's not just color. You can use contrast with size. You can use contrast in shape. I want to draw attention to this shape in the middle. So I change the shape of it. I want to draw attention to this square. I make it much bigger than the second square. So it's just another, I'm going to show you examples of how to use all these later on. So don't worry too much if this isn't making quite sense. Like my sentences, they don't make quite sense all the time. So here's an image showing contrast in action. All of these images of books leaning to one side, one of them is leaning the other way, and it's a different color. So our attention is immediately drawn to where the contrast is in the image. And this poster for Maze Runner, the contrast is right in the middle, showing the character and this huge landscape they're walking out into. So your attention is immediately drawn to that. So wherever you want someone's attention to go, think about how you can contrast it in a way so it differentiates itself from the rest of the image. Another technique is hierarchy. you'll have no doubt seen this image or a similar one online by some cretin who's just sharing something they've seen a million times. But it says, you will read this first, you will then probably read this immediately afterwards, and you'll most likely leave this for last. Now, this works similarly to what I was talking about earlier on when you've got fewer bits of copy. So when you've got two or three, you can use size to direct people's attention more than the actual placement of it. I'll show you a good example of this. So this is a poster for a TV show. Now, your natural instinct would be to put what you want people to read first at the top and what you want them to read second at the bottom. But when you've only got two or three things that are fighting for attention, you can place the main title at the bottom of an image, but draw attention to it from its size rather than its placement. So you're using contrast to gain the emphasis on it. You don't have to particularly worry about the placement. That does not work the more information that you have. So if we look at this graphic, if I was to take the header of this, make it large, and place it at the bottom, it suddenly becomes confusing because there's too much going on. The more elements you have fighting for attention, the more the more old school you need to be with how you apply the rules. So the more things we have, we need to go to the linear top to bottom, left to right sort of format. Because we've got a title here, an opening paragraph, a pie chart, a load of stats. This needs to make sense because there's so many things fighting for attention that it needs to be quite clear what's going on. Whereas here, we've only got two or three things. We can play with the placement of it. So when you see this line, when you see this image online, the reason this works is there's only three lines of text here. We don't have any separate graphics. There's no pie charts. There's no bar graphs. There's none of that nonsense. I just have three lines of text. So I can play with the placement a little bit and use size as the thing that directs your attention. There's the size, the weight, that will ultimately lead me to read this one first, that one second, this one third. You will find there's always somebody in the comments going, well, I didn't read it in that order. There's always anomalies for these things, but generally 99% of the population will read it in that order. The next one is repetition. Now, if you're working for a smaller company and you don't have many assets to play with, repetition becomes your friend. So if you're looking at your brand guidelines and you just see one shape and one word, and you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? This is when you can repeat things. So if I said to you, I want you to create a poster, but I'm only going to give you the letter A to work with, you'd walk out the room. But that's not enough, Dave. But with repetition, suddenly I can create a full poster. I've just got loads of A's and I can just flip them around and suddenly there's an A in the negative space and it's all very interesting. But I've just used one letter A to create something quite interesting. I only have one lemon. No, sorry. I've got 30 lemons. Now it's an interesting image. I've got the word focus. I can use it a ton of times. I can then use contrast to draw attention to one of them and gain my focus. So that's an interesting technique to use. Now, the four techniques that I've just shown you, I'm going to show you how we can do something with this. So let's imagine in your business, you're creating a little separate service. It's called Circle. And your boss comes over to you and says, listen, I need a social media graphic for Circle. It's going to be great. I want you to create an image. We need to get people excited about this. And you say, sweet. What have you got for me? I've got a circle and I've got the word circle. So on you go. And away they go. And you think, brilliant. What am I going to do with this? Right? So we can look at the couple of little techniques we've used so far. This is all we have to work with, and we're going to create a graphic out of it. Now we can start thinking of balance, right? The whole let's just place things in the center. That's all right, I suppose, if we're going for something quite minimal. I can center it above the circle, put them in the center. Again, it's kind of all right, but there's not much exciting going on there. We can look at contrast. So I can maybe take our little circle. I'll give it a little pop of purple there. Okay, now we're kind of getting somewhere. Still a bit crap though. Let's look at size contrast. So let's take our circle and make it feckin' huge. And I'm going to throw it there. And I'm going to throw the title just underneath it there. Now you're creating something a little bit interesting. I could also do that at the side. I could pop my little circle down there, pop my little title there, pop it off to the side. Now we're getting something that looks a little bit interesting. Now we can try a bit of repetition, possibly. I've only got this one circle. Let's just create a load of them. Let's just throw this out. Da 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 da. This won't take me long. Chat amongst yourselves. No, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna throw another row underneath that. Let's just give me four of these. That's lovely. Okay. And I could do that for infinitum. I could cover the whole thing in repeated circles. Maybe I want to draw attention to one of them and I change the size of it. Not like that, Dave. Jeez. I change the size of it just like that. Maybe I change the color of it. We've got a little thing. Maybe if I want to give some people with OCD a bit of a aneurysm, I just put it there. Ah! So I'm just giving it a little bit of contrast, a bit of repetition. We're still balanced. I'm still throwing that in the center. And it's little techniques like that. You can literally take a shape and a word and do various different things with. And that's what I want you to take from today, really. Every little sort of technique that I'm showing you can all be applied individually, or you can wrap them up with each other to create little interesting ideas. Now, the next thing is a bone of contention for a lot of people. It's white space. And it doesn't literally mean white space, it means empty space. And you will have no doubt received feedback at some point for something you do saying it looks empty, or can we not make the thing bigger, or that kind of thing. I want to show you I want to show you how to combat that for starters. So if we look at this poster for a design museum, you will see it's got the information of when this exhibition is happening, and it's got a little graphic at the side. It's got tons of empty space here, right? But I don't feel bad about it. It's nice. It's classy. It's intentional. It lets it breathe. And the best sort of artists, the best sort of designers know when to make something breathe. The perfect analogy for this is if you're ever dealing with someone who's giving you sort of feedback and they have a problem with empty space. If you know they're a movie fan, if you know they're a comedy fan, a music fan, whatever it is, the best directors know when to let a scene breathe, when the dialogue can be silent. The best musicians know when to use space between notes. The best comedians know how to use timing and pauses. And the best artists and designers know that space is needed and it's fine and we should all calm down. So this one, for example, is absolutely grand. It makes it look a little bit more refined because you don't have to fill the space. It's like if you're creating a song and you just want the entire thing to be a wall of noise with no dynamics, it loses all of its interest. And it's the same thing with design. You show this to someone, their immediate reaction generally is, well, can we not make the dude like three times the size? Or can we not make that text massive so people will see it? People will still see it. It's just more intentional, more refined, slightly nicer if we just let the two elements that we've got breathe, and people will know exactly where to direct their attention and they'll be able to read it. I'm going to show you some great examples of this in action. This hungry copywriter wanted, this ad is just phenomenal. Just a little chewed Bic pen lid and hungry copywriter wanted. These have, this ad has impact because it has so much space around it. And the copy's quite small. It's still perfectly legible, but there's something about it being small that gives it confidence. If you were to blow that up to about four or five times the size, it's almost like you're saying, "Hey, I thought of a clever line. Can you read it? Can you read it? How about now? How about now?" But keeping it small keeps it refined. It gives it purpose, and it's absolutely the way to go. Now, this one, for example, the first sign of lung cancer and a picture of a cigarette. Now, this one, the text is bigger, but it's bigger to give the image contrast. The cigarette being this small thing that causes so much death is where the impact comes in on here. So to almost make it look small and insignificant while also being incredibly significant needs to show contrast between the size of the cigarette and the size of the type. So it does make sense for this type to be quite large because it allows the cigarette to look a lot smaller than it is. So this small, seemingly insignificant object is actually horrifying to most people who ever touch it. So that's when the space is needed. And obviously, this is a really famous Volkswagen one. Think small. This only works because the Volkswagen is small. If it was a normal size, it wouldn't come across. So the space is needed to really, really show that we're showing you how small the car is, even though most reasonable human beings will know that that is not an actual sized car. Now, the other thing I want to show you is how to deal with objections specifically for this one. So you can learn all these techniques, but you still have to ultimately show the final work to someone who will not know these techniques. So we'll need a little bit of education in the term in the way of you wording these things a little bit differently. So let's imagine you get an objection that says, "Can we just fill in that space?" You'll come back and say, "We could, but that would reduce the impact of the message. Right now, the space is helping to guide the viewer's eye." So anytime you mention words, this will reduce the impact. That's normally enough to shut people up. Or if you get it just looks empty. You're going to reframe the word empty to no, 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 it looks intentional. The extra space keeps the focus on what matters most. So reframe the word empty to intentional and then just tell them you've been on a course or use the words it's been scientifically proven because that people love that, but that's actually a fact. There's loads of studies that have been done on A/B testing different designs and tracking where eyes go onto them using like these heat maps, and the space is the way to go. Objection: I want to use every inch of space. You're going to say, that's understandable, because we all know one of the main factors in conflict resolution is to show the cretin that you're talking to that you understand where they're coming from first, before explaining to them why they're ultimately wrong, very wrong. Cramming too much in will have the opposite effect. It can feel overwhelming and reduce engagement. If you use the words reduce engagement to anyone, they'll generally cack themselves and back off. Then we've got, can we just make everything bigger? To which you will respond, increasing everything at once actually makes things harder to read. Everything starts fighting for your attention. White space ensures the right things get attention. And like I said before, if you know you're dealing with a music fan, just throw out a well-written song isn't just about the notes, it's about the space between them. And if they're a reasonable human being, they'll go, "Oh God, you're right." And then they'll be like, "Oh my God, you're amazing." And, promotions and all the other stuff we talked about earlier. And then if diplomacy fails, you could just say, "What the hell have you employed me for, you absolute weapon?" That one has a smaller hit rate, but if you've lost the will to live, just use it. It's generally fine. Right, alignment. Alignment takes you from utter chaos like this and heart palpitations to beautiful order and beautiful balance. And this generally comes from grids. Now, I'm sure you all are aware of this. In most design software, you will have these rulers along the top and the bottom. If you drag out from these, you will give yourself a little grid that you can use to snap elements to, and you can line everything up. So as default, Canva, I don't know if you've ever noticed this or you know how to use it. If you move things along, you'll notice this little purple bounding box that appears along the edges. That's there to help you line things up. It also creates its own margin along the edges. And it's by default, Canva applies a 10% margin, 10% of the overall canvas size to the margin. And it just means it's there to give you, it doesn't so much apply to images because images can stretch out. Really, that kind of helps them. But with text, if you have anything too close to the edge, again, looks a little bit jarring, puts people off, puts that friction in between you and the viewer. So a general nice rule of thumb is to just stick within the margins for any text that you have. And if you want to make it very, very clear that all of the images and text you are showing are part of the same family and should be shown and read and understood together, you align them all up together, right? So that works left aligned, works right aligned, and I'll show you an example. This document, not everything's aligned to the same lines, but you'll see everything here is all aligned to the same line on the left. So you inherently understand that these are part of the same group. I should read these together. They are all connected in some way. This little bit on the bottom right-hand side, again, is all aligned to the left. It's just a different left. So you understand that they are all kind of grouped together and they're part of a family. Same with everything here. And then the more and more elements you have, you can enter grid-ageddon and really, really go to town, making sure that everything is aligned properly and all of that kind of business. Right, let's talk about emphasis. Emphasis. Another tricky thing can be if you have an image, a larger image, knowing where exactly to place it. And there's a rule that's used a lot in art and photography, known as the rule of thirds. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. Again, this is something you can use your grid lines for. Whatever the width and height of your canvas you're working on, divide them by three and place grids in those thirds, right? So I'm working with a 10 by 80, 10 by 80 one here. So I've placed these lines on the thirds. And how this works is on the intersecting points of each one of these lines, that's where you can draw people's focus. There's something about us inherently as human beings. We just like things in groups of three. And it works even when you're looking at an image that isn't immediately obvious that it's separated into threes, but we can use that to our advantage. So if we look at this image of the Radio City Tower, I might have to place this in an image, and I think to myself, I know I'll place it in the center. There's balance, that's fine. And that works, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to do something a little bit more interesting in it, something a little bit more dynamic, you can use the rule of thirds, where I would just take this same image and I would place the center point in it where I want to draw attention, where those intersecting lines meet. And you'll see it just creates a slightly more interesting, slightly more dynamic image, gives you room to put some text in there if you wish. And it's just a nice way of, it's an interesting way of giving you a framework to work to so you know where to place elements of an image when just chucking them in the center is a little bit boring. I'll show you another one with this model. She's in the middle. Lovely, fine, nothing wrong with that. But if I want to look at a little, if I want it to look a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting, I'll just place her eye line in another one of those intersecting grids. And it's just a little bit more interesting. You'll start noticing this a lot in photography if you're not familiar with it already. When you see a bit of space at the center, if you've ever thought, why have they framed it that way? It's because of this. It's because it sits nice and neatly into the rule of thirds. So it just looks nicer. It's the same thing here with the head shot, or sorry, with the head of this skier. And I've done it here with this bird. The eye of the bird now sits in the rule of thirds. It now sits down here at the bottom left. So, if you had this image and you had this text, you might not be sure where to place the bird. So maybe you chuck it there, but it just looks a little bit sort of awkward. Doesn't really make quite as much sense. But putting it there, again, it creates a lovely amount of space, but that's absolutely fine because it's intentional space. Proportions. This is another thing that trips a lot of people up. And I'm going to use, please forgive me, I'm going to use a very wanky term now, right? But please forgive me. You'll hear this a lot from pretentious designers, right? Which I am not one. Um, but the golden ratio, right? You'll have heard people talk about this before. Essentially, no one uses it, right? And if they tell you they do, they're probably lying to you. But the reason that I mention it is because you're probably familiar with the term. So I want you to be able to recall this number quite easily. And the number is 1.618, right? I only want you to remember the 1.6, right? And if you ever forget it, just think, oh, what was that twat on that call saying? Oh, golden ratio. And you'll remember 1.6. And there's a reason for that. When you're working with text, I hear this a lot, and people have no idea how to size the text. And they've no idea, right? What size should I make the body copy versus the subheader versus the header? How do I know what's a decent one? And there's a very, very simple rule for doing this. And again, like every other rule, it can be played with, it can be broken. But let's say I've got this little caption text here, which I'm starting with, right? I'm starting with my smallest text and I want to size it 10, right? So that's my starting point. To then decide what the next level of text should be, I multiply it by the 1.6. And then I get 16. And then I want to know what my header should be. So I again multiply that by 1.6 and I round it up to the nearest number. And then again with the header. So it's a nice, neat way of creating that hierarchy between text. Because quite often you'll just grab one of these bounding boxes and go, that'll do. But general rule of thumb and a nice easy way to do it is just multiply it by 1.6 and you're done. Again, sometimes headers, you just really want them to look nice and chunky. Just whack them up or just keep multiplying them to 1.6 until you get something that is nice. But that's a nice easy way to remember how to separate the sizes of your text. And a simple one here to end on is usability, right? Just think to yourself, the vast majority of the time, you will be designing on a desktop or a laptop, but most people will see what you're designing ultimately on a smaller device on their phone. So just think to yourself, this might look perfectly passable on my desktop currently. Is it still going to be readable on a phone? Because not everybody um, is as fancy as you are with your eyeballs. So just think about the usability, right? So that's the principles. I'm going to show you some examples now of putting them into action, right? So I'm going to bring back my little thingy here. I'm going to use DHL as an example. They have their brand guidelines online as well. So I'm going to show you, a lot of you will have brand guidelines that you have to work with. You'll also work with people who insist that these guidelines are some sort of biblical text that cannot be deviated from. And that's not true at all. They're called guidelines for a reason. They're just a guide. They're useful in times, and there are times when you need to throw them out the window and do something completely different. And again, I'm going to show you an example of when it's appropriate to do that and how you can justify why you're doing it at the same time. But if we take an example as to when these should be used, for internal communications, customer-facing materials, new product launches, official documents, all that kind of nonsense. Let's imagine DHL have just given us a brief, right? And the brief is they want us to create an image promoting their services to e-commerce brands. They want the logo in there. They want the tagline "Excellence simply delivered" in there. They want this URL. They want their brand colors, and they want to try a version with a box, a van, and a happy customer, right? They want it in a square format, portrait format, and landscape format. Oh, the joys. So this is our brief. I'm going to show you what I've done with it, right? So this first example, nice, simple square image. I've got the logo here. I've got their tagline, and I have got their URL and just a nice image of the box at the bottom. Nice and simple. You'll see that everything is centered, and that is absolutely fine because we're not dealing with loads and loads of text. Perfectly readable, all grand. Let's try the one with the van. Now, this image of the van is cuts off here, so I have to throw it to the left, which means I've got this sort of janky image here. So I've moved everything to the left to compensate for that. I've separated these more because I've got the space to do so. You know that these two should be read together. This one could be read separately. All good. And then an image of a happy customer, which I've again put nice in the middle. DHL probably wouldn't approve of what this guy's just bought, but that's fine. This isn't a real project. It's just for me. Then the portrait version of all of these. You'll see that they all work pretty much the same, except for this one, it's elongated. So now I've kept it exactly the same layout. I've just introduced a load of space. And look, no one's dead. No one died. It's all fine. There's space. It's intentional space. It works just fine. These images work by taking up the space, so we can include. I can give our little happy, I'm assuming single man, some space here where he can enjoy his boxes. And then the landscape versions, nice and simple, nice and balanced. Image on the right, text on the left. Each one of these work quite similarly. So that's that. Now let's try a second brief. Something where we take the brand guidelines and we set them on fire because we just don't need them. So let's imagine DHL, like they've just asked us, they're wanting to advertise to e-commerce brands. But this time, a very specific subset of e-commerce brands. So this one, they want to target e-com brands who serve sports nuts and gym fans, right? So now we're not talking to our overall demographic anymore. We're kind of honing in on a very specific audience. So we need to appear in their world so they understand that we understand them. So in this instance, I'm not too concerned with our normal yellows and reds. I want to look at what people already do in this world. So I look at the kind of typefaces used, the kind of chunky type and the gritty textures and the angular fonts and the more bold sort of color palettes and serious imagery. And then things get a lot more dark in this world. Everything's like black backgrounds and you've got pops of red. The photography is more dynamic. There's more movement in it. There's explosions. So this is a massive world away from our normal little lovely DHL world. So I could create something in our little, visual ecosphere, but it won't really speak to these guys specifically. So that's when I would create something like this. It's a lot darker. You've got grittier, chunkier, angular text. I'm going to apologize to the copywriters in the room because it's not what I do, but no pain, no gain. Your protein's on the plane. This kind of a thing, and eat, sleep, gift, repeat. So I'd, create these taglines in this more gym-friendly, sports nut kind of style and deviate away from the usual ones. So if I am trying to talk to just a large subset of individuals, then this obviously is completely grand. But if we're really honing in and we're going for a specific thing, that's when you can say, listen, I don't think we should really worry about our brand guidelines too much now because we're talking to this specific audience. Like if you were advertising for a specific festival that was happening, then you'd want to hone into the visuals around that festival rather than worrying too much that we must stick to the brand guidelines because we paid a feckin' fortune for them. You want to do something that actually makes sense so you know when to go from this to this because the definition of graphic design, maybe should have started with, is this. The art and practice of visually communicating ideas, messages, and information through the use of typography, images, colors, and layout. Blah, blah, blah. The, it exists to communicate a message. And if your brand guidelines do not serve those message, don't use them. Now, I'm going to show you a really good example of graphic design, right? And Joe's going to be surprised. But if any of you were on LinkedIn last Friday, you might have seen this image that Joe created to advertise this course. And I'm going to tell you why this is actually exceptional graphic design. The reason for this design existing is to show that I don't know how to design stuff. So there's a course that's going to show you how to design some stuff. And so this doesn't need to be this coiffured thing. It would get zero attention if it was. He's displayed exactly what the problem is, and therein has created an exceptional piece of graphic design. Although he would not have thought it when he created it, but it's communicated the message he's trying to communicate perfectly. So I think it's great. So well done, Joe. I think it's brilliant. Now let's imagine you're starting from scratch, right? In a tiny little company, you don't really have brand guidelines. You don't really have a color palette to speak of. You've got nothing. So where the hell do you go? Now, I'm going to pretend, for the purposes of this experiment, that I'm creating a product, right? I'm creating a pet probiotic, and I start looking at my competitors. I'm seeing what they're doing. I'm seeing their packaging, the kind of graphics they've got. And I think to myself, right, I want to get into this niche, but I want to be something completely different. The way I would tackle that is the way you will already be familiar with brands building their sort of brand identity, but you might not be too familiar about how to translate that into actual visuals. So generally, you define your brand's personality, right? For me and this probiotic type dog brand that I'm going to build, I want to be the fun person in this space, right? Everybody loves their dogs. I can't, every time I look at my dog, I can't help but smile. So I want to convey that in whatever product I'm producing for this pet owner. So they just feel happy when they see it. So I want to be the fun one rather than the medically serious one. I'm still obviously taking what I do seriously, but I want to do it with a smile. You normally define your brand's origin story, your mission, and your values. But how do you take all of that and actually assign it to visuals? That can be the thing that confuses a lot of people. And if you don't have a real sort of defined brand story, then it can be useful to find a metaphor that works with it. So I'm going to show you a way that I do this, and then I'm going to show you a way that will work, that might work better for you if your brain isn't wired in the same way that mine is. So I'm not a fan of looking at what other designers do. I'm not a fan of, if I'm looking to create packaging, I rarely look at other packaging, because you can't help but, emulate those what's already out there, and I like to try and approach it from a different way. So if I go back to building my brand's personality, I want to choose a physical person that exists that I want to emulate. I want to choose a celebrity that I want to be that person of this space. So I want to be the Will Ferrell of pet probiotics, right? So I would Google Will Ferrell. And I'm going to start looking at pictures of Will Ferrell to see what comes to mind. It's one of his most famous characters, Elf, is green and yellows. I might play about with that color palette. I like his wearing his little hat. There's another image here that I absolutely love. Him in little tight pants from an old SNL sketch. That might send me in some directions. But I'm looking at just different things and outfits he's wearing and different scenarios and just seeing what that kind of informs in my head. And it's taken me here. So first of all, I wanted to think of a name for my probiotic. I came up with Gutley because Muttley's a famous dog, and this thing helps your dog's guts. So we're calling it Gutley. I've created a quick little logo for it with an intestinal tract in the U. You know, that's questionable, but there it is. And a cheeky little mascot. And I've given him little tight, little small pants, which have been loosely inspired by Will Ferrell's tight pants in that image. I've got with a green and yellow color palette like Elf, and I've created this packaging design for it, which has been informed by me looking at just some images of a celebrity. I'll generally look at like movies and album covers and just shots of people that I kind of want to emulate to try and pick ideas from that rather than packaging designs. But I appreciate that I'm a little odd. So I'm going to show you another way of doing it if you've got zero experience, zero to work from. And it's an AI tool called Perplexity, right? Now, I know there'll be various different opinions on AI in the room, but this one, we're not using this to do the work for you. We're using this as a research tool to give you some information. And the reason that I like Perplexity is it's only going to give us a handful of images as reference images. If you go onto Pinterest or you go onto Google Images, you are met with thousands of images and it's complete overwhelm. Where do I look first? How is this supposed to help me build my own visual identity when I'm looking at thousands of images? This will literally give us a handful to work with, so you don't get that sort of paralysis of having too many options. So I'm going to stick in here and I'm going to do this live and hope it works. Um, I'm creating a dog supplement brand and I need some inspiration to help develop the visual identity around it. I'll zoom into that in case you can't see it. I want my brand to be comical. Imagine us like the Will Ferrell of dog supplements, playful, friendly, and comedic. We really care about dogs. We want our customers to feel the same and welcome in our hands. Can you give me some visual inspiration for graphics that match this similar tone, right? I'm going to hit the old button there and hope that this works. So what this should do, he says, I'm not too worried about the text it produces here, right? I'm worried about the images it generates on the right-hand side, which, for the love of God, if these don't come up, this is going to be, they haven't come up. Okay. I literally did this yesterday. It was fine. What normally happens is this will bring up some images on the right-hand side, right? Hold on. Oh, the link, everything's gone. Hold on. Technical issues, my friends, technical issues. Okay, imagine this worked, right? And on the right-hand side, it will bring up some images that show similar brands. And it restricts it to about 10 images when it's in a good mood, obviously. It restricts it to about 10 images. And it's a nice sort of condensed way without you getting the paralysis of having too many options. And I really, really like it. And what it normally does when it's behaving itself is these little titles are also clickable. So if I clicked color palette, it would take me down the page a little bit more, and it would then show me some images of some color palettes that I can get some inspiration from. But the reason that I like this when it works is because of the fact that it restricts the amount of inspirational images it shows you. So you're not overwhelmed with loads of choice. If we just ignore the last minute though, pretend that was a roaring success, I am going to summarize the bits we've just been through. So, the principles. Remember your balance, right? Remember to split things so there's equal weight distribution on either side of the image. That should help you figure out how to place things. And especially with text, try not to overwhelm people by having more than 50% small copy on a design. Unless it's something you know people really want to read, and then obviously they'll be invested, but vast majority of the time they won't be. So make it slightly more engaging. Use contrast in the form of color, size, or shape. Remember, we got this little site, Web AIM, which can really help you see if there is genuine contrast so you know that things are going to be properly legible. Remember your hierarchy. If you've only got 2 or 3 lines of text, you can play with the size to draw people's attention. Any more than that, stick with the standard um, north to south, left to right. If you are limited on assets you have to work with, just repeat the living hell out of them and you'll get something nice. Don't be afraid of white space. It is your friend. It is there to help things look more intentional, more impactful, and more sort of refined. And if you do deal with any Egypts, tell them it looks intentional, not empty. And if diplomacy goes out the window, say, get in the bin, you ass cabinet, or words to that effect. Alignment. Grids, remember you can pull out little, oh God, what's happening? You can pull out little grids from the rulers to help you line things up. If you've got a few things, you want to make it very clear that they're part of the same family, line them all up together and put other elements separately. You got the rule of thirds. If you don't know where to put an image, pick a point in an image that you want people to be drawn to and stick it in one of these little cross sections. Um, Use the wanky golden ratio term whenever you want to size text and just think 1.6, right? Because if you ever forget that number, Google the golden ratio and that number will come up and you'll go, oh yeah, 1.6. And that'll help you size text. And then remember usability. Whatever you're designing, it will generally always be seen as a smaller version because most of us spend our entire lives looking at our feckin' phones. So make sure that size-wise, it still works when it's translated onto a smaller device. And do not be afraid to throw the rule book completely out of the window if it serves the purpose for the reason the design is existing in the first place. Goodbye. That's me done.
Mate, congratulations. Like, I'm saying congratulations because that was just wicked. So,
Thanks, man.
for,
Was
for,
that too much? I don't know. That might have been too much in one
honestly,
fast swoop.
no. I love, like there was a clear moment for me, like about half an hour in, where you got very comfortable and the swear count started going up, and that
Oh,
was
sorry, man. Yeah, that's involuntary. I'm sorry.
not at all. But like you can see the reactions coming in today. You can see hopefully the chat messages coming in. If you can't, Dave, then I'm going to send it to you afterwards because you
Oh,
get the
thanks.
biggest ego boost in the world. But
That's
thank
not what I
you.
need.
And thank you to the community as well for
Yeah,
just
but hopefully, guys, that was in some way useful, and there's something you can take from that. Because design
absolutely,
principles generally, when talking about them, is dull as hell. Like it genuinely is. So hopefully that was not horrific to
look,
go through.
absolutely not, absolutely not. Spot on, as Antonia has said in the chat. Let's are you okay to take a few questions because
Oh
there's
God, that took an hour. I'm so sorry.
mate, it's all good. There's 18 open questions from the community, so like maybe the only encouragement I can give to folks watching is we probably won't get through all of them. In fact, we definitely won't get through all of them. So if you want to go into the Q&A feature and give a thumbs up to any questions that you like, then I'll make sure to prioritize these for Dave.
Okay. Oh, I can do
So
that, can
no, well,
I?
you can go through the questions as well, Dave,
Power.
if you like. But let's take the top one because there's a couple of questions that come in from folks about like choosing the right app to do the right job. And so you've been phenomenal today, and you did exactly what I asked you to do, which was you based it in Canva because that's the tool that so many of us will have access to in our day to day job. But the question here is, what's your top apps for graphic design? Do you use different ones depending on the nature of your project, i.e., web design, prints, logos, etc.? It's the question that's gravitated to the top. So I think people want to know what you use and what you recommended.
Okay, so what I use is the industry standard. It is the Adobe suite. Photoshop, Illustrator, all of the things. I've been using them since this is going to age me, but I've been using them since the late 90s. Um, so I am so familiar. So many people are angry with Adobe now. They've got me. Like I'm not going anywhere else.
Mhm.
Because I'm so familiar with how those apps work, and I've just spent countless hours learning them. That I've no desire to go anywhere else. Unless they murder someone on live television, I'm gonna stick with them. So no matter how much they're bankrupting me. No, but I love Adobe's software, so I'm still a massive fan. That's a very steep learning curve if you haven't gone
Mhm.
anywhere near them. So that's you can probably ignore that for the most part. Um, I think Canva's decent. I've done quite a few posts in the past slagging it off, but they're all very tongue in cheek. Like it's decent for what you need to do. Anybody that asks me to design something and they need it editable, I will
Mhm.
generally design the parts that I need to in Adobe and I will bring it into Canva to add the text that they can then edit. I've tried, actually, speaking of Adobe, I've tried Adobe Express.
Mhm.
I didn't find it as intuitive as Canva, funny enough, even though I've grown up using Adobe.
Interesting.
Um, so Canva's my one. The main sticking point for people about Adobe is the monthly subscription costs, right? I
Mhm.
know that there is another company called Affinity, Affinity,
Mhm.
that do the same software, um, but they don't. I might be wrong about this. It's either a much cheaper monthly cost or it's just a one-off fee. In fact, I think it's a one-off fee. So loads of people are going over to Infinity because they don't expect this ongoing, you know, this ongoing cost.
Yeah.
So that's a good option for people who want to take it a bit more seriously, but they don't want to have to remortgage their house every month to pay for it. And Affinity is a good option. And then I think for everything else, like you just gotta kind of it's what works for you really, because I think Canva has been designed to be very intuitive.
Yeah.
So I think it's the reason that it is one of the most used ones. So it's really just playing about and see what you think. But again, there are more and more options coming up for this world. So it's the whole option paralysis thing again. Just
Yeah.
find one, get used to it, and stick with it.
I love that. I mean, like that was definitely like at the beginning there, like your answer is like, I'm used to this thing, so I use it. And like, I think that's to your point about the paralysis. Sometimes like you see so many options out there and you're like, oh goodness, but if you've got that option where you're like, I'm familiar with this, roll with it. I think
Yeah,
that's solid
yeah, just
advice.
roll with it. Unless they do something
Terrible.
morally questionable. Well, actually, no, that's not true because they always do things morally questionable. Unless they do something like, horrific that you can't
Yeah,
live with.
yeah. I love it. Let's go to the next question. So we'll take the top one here from Sarah. So Sarah's asked, we often have to produce event posters that require a lot of info, what it is, where it is, how much the tickets, how to book, etc., etc. How would you go about trying to include all the info with a less is more approach? So Sarah's whacked in the curveball at the end there.
I don't know if you remember the when I was talking about
Mhm.
alignment, I showed you a document that it had three different sections on it.
Yeah.
They were all aligned differently,
Hmm.
but each bit was aligned together, so you knew it was a family of info. That's kind of the way you treat that kind of stuff. So you decide what the most important information is, and you group that together. So you align it together, and with stuff like that, it's you know where is it, when is it, that kind of stuff. How much is it, right? So you bulk those things together. Then all of the information, the more detailed stuff, can generally like sit at the bottom and be a lot smaller. So depending on if it's going to be a poster, it's going to be like A3 size, then you can go quite a bit smaller on the text at the bottom. Excuse me. And you will generally have some sort of bright, vibrant graphic in there that will draw people's attention to it from afar to get them close to inspect a bit more. So you need to give that as much attention as possible so it draws people in from a distance, which is generally what you're trying to do with print work, is they will initially see it from afar and they should be intrigued enough to get closer and read all the stuff. So you should never be worried about all of the finer details being read from a distance because, people will get close up for that kind of thing. So I would say just group things into families, right?
Hmm.
So group the first most prevalent, most important information into family one. Family two is the second priority information. Family three is the third priority information. And then make your most prominent stuff right at the top, nice and big, nice little space for your image. And then along the bottom, just group it into two separate things and then distribute it as you see fit. But yeah, pop things into priority families. I've never said that before.
I love that, but I just love seeing your brain work on this as well. Like it's actually completely foreign to me, and
Yeah.
that's the joy of this. So thank you for sharing that. It's like you can take a lot from just hearing you speak through that process. So that's wicked.
Okay, cool.
Um, there's 24 open questions, mate. So I'm sort of
Dude, I'm fine. I'm grand.
we'll keep on going.
I don't
So
mind if people are still here. Is anyone still here?
oh mate, there's like hundreds of people still
Oh,
here.
fine,
So
fine.
we're doing good. So we've got Martine in the Q&A who says, what are some useful YouTube channels you recommend for continuing to learn design principles? But I'd probably broaden that out like to just resources in general or places where you go to learn about design or have done in the past.
Um, hold on. I won't be able to remember these off by. Oh, Brian Cox has just started talking on my YouTube. Hold
Hey,
on.
I'm all here for Brian Cox.
So am
Like
I.
calming vibes.
What's his name? Actually, ask me another one, and I'll pull
Cool,
up some stuff while you're doing that because
wicked.
I need to remind myself the names of these people. But there are some great people on YouTube. I'll
Nice,
just pull up their names. But yeah,
wicked.
go for
So
it.
the next one is from Anne Marie. Then, so I noticed when you were doing your DHL example, you were
Yeah.
using some AI imagery as
Yes.
part of it. So Anne Marie says, any tips on how to use AI to produce custom, palatable graphics and illustrations while avoiding the uncanny AI look? But I'll probably broaden that out and just sort of say AI imagery in general
Yeah.
when exploring this as part of our graphic design. What's your views and when to use it,
Okay.
if
So
to use
I had a huge moral conflict with AI when it first came out because obviously the way the models have been trained and it just trained on other people's work and it just felt wrong. And then obviously Adobe started to integrate AI into their tools. And there were things that I used to spend an inordinate amount of time doing that I can now do in seconds. And I was like, oh, this is good, isn't it? Um, so I think of all the time I've wasted over the last 20 odd years doing
it?
grind images with the pen tool or expanding images to make them look bigger than they are. It would take so much time, and now I can do it with the click of a button. So, and the more of those kind of little tools I used, I was like, oh, I can't. I need to square this away in my own head because at one stage I don't like how these are being trained, so I'm against this. The other half of me is using it now for loads of different things. I can't have both of the like. Is this just a hypocritical thing you just have to like come to terms with? Um, and eventually, like everything else, you have to land somewhere. There's like this is quite a crude example, right? But I'm going to share it anyway because hopefully most people will understand where I'm coming from. Most of us have our electronic devices are mined, the batteries for them are mined in incredibly unethical ways. Most of the clothes we wear are manufactured in incredibly ethical ways. There comes a point where you either live in society and put up with some stuff and you kind of get on with it. And then there's stuff you really, really care about that you hone in on and you do active things to stop that thing. It just became one of those for me. And that's probably I'm not trying to this is me doing the opposite of taking the moral high ground. I'm taking the moral low ground. I decided that it came to a point where it was becoming so efficient to my workflow that I just had to be okay with the other stuff because I can't be both. And
Nice.
just be transparent with when I'm using it. So image wise, the slight benefit that I have is I have Photoshop skills.
Hmm.
So if I ever create an image on it, I can get rid of the janky parts. I know
Hmm.
how to fix them and make them look decent. I can take a proper hand from a photograph and superimpose it onto the janky hand that AI's created and make it look like it's supposed to be there. So when I come across the janky stuff, I just fix it. For me, it's a lot of my stuff is creating visual identities for people. So it's creating logos and the brand guidelines and stuff. So AI very, very rarely forms a part of any of that kind of stuff. So I do not use it for any of that kind of stuff. But if I need an image created like that DHL ad,
Hmm.
what I would have done before is people are rarely paying for a photo shoot for stuff like that. So you've got to just make the image work. So I would have gone to I either would have paid for the stock imagery. I subscribe to sites like Envato and stuff, so I would get a photograph that already exists and a load of other images that would already exist, and I would mash them together to create a composite of that image. So in order to do that, I'd always, for as long, far back as I can remember, I'm always using other people's work
Hmm.
to create, I don't design the fonts that I use. I haven't created the software that I use to create those things in the first place. It's all other people's work that I'm just bringing together to make something new.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
kind of started looking at AI that way. It's the one thing I don't want people to use AI for is the one thing I'm always against it for is anything that you enjoy doing, anything that actually fires up your brain, don't use it for. So for me, I adore coming up with ideas, whether it's for content on LinkedIn, or whether it's from there's a guy just earlier on today wants me to create some t-shirt designs for his business and some stickers and some mugs, and he said just go nuts.
Hmm.
So I sat and I just thought of a load of ideas for him and I just emailed them off earlier on this morning. And I love that, right? Outsourcing stuff like that to me is the death of my mind.
Hmm.
And I've no desire to do that. But if it's the dull stuff, the stuff that used to take me hours and I got no enjoyment from, and AI can quickly speed up that process, then I'm all in.
Nice.
So I kind of had to decide, I can't be anti it in one way and pro it. Yeah,
Hmm.
you're in or you're not. Like, shut up, Dave. So it was that. So sorry, I don't think I've answered this question at all, have I? The the to deal with the jankiness, I honestly think in about a year and a year half's time, the jankiness won't be an issue anymore, and that's when we're all screwed because we won't be able to tell who's um what's real and what's not. So that's actually quite terrifying.
Hmm.
At the minute, you just have to prompt as good as you can
Hmm.
and get better at framing things. So if you create an image and a part of it is quite janky, that's when you can start using the rule of thirds that I showed you earlier on. You might have a whole body image of someone, the lower half looks crap, but you can take their eye line and put it down to one of those intersectioning points on the grid, the rule of thirds. You don't need the other parts of their body, but if the face looks well enough, that might be all you need. So it's learning how to get better with framing things, and the rule of thirds can help with that. So you can cut away the janky bits and use it. Because, as much as, and I know a ton of people who are publicly against AI, speak to them privately, they're using it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Nice.
it's part of our lives now. We just have to figure out a way to, live with it and have it not destroy us.
Bang on.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it did. So, let's go to the next one. So there's probably four more that I can see towards the top, which I think we'll ask, and then we'll bring it to a close after that.
Cool.
Um, first, so we were going to circle back to the resource actually first. So with the YouTube search, did you get to the bottom of
No, I
your?
started ranting about AI. Sorry.
That's cool. I can take another one. So
Great. I
so
forgot that I'm supposed to be multitasking.
so Marie asks in the Q&A, what tools or processes do you use to get a decent brief out of people? Are there specific questions I should be asking my team when asking them for what they want us to do?
Um, it's different. It's different for different projects. I suppose if you look at the reason I highlighted Joe's graphic as being actually a really good example of
Mhm.
good graphic design is because it doesn't obey any of those rules I used, but it delivers on the actual goal.
Mhm.
Um, I always try and find out what the goal is. What do you actually want to happen as a result of this thing existing? And you can extrapolate loads from that as to, how much emphasis do we actually need to put on these brand guidelines, or how much does the copy on this, how much copy needs to be on this? Maybe we just need um, a quick headline, and then the viewer will be directed somewhere else. Yeah, it's really, really trying to nail down what the goal is and
Mhm.
what action needs to be taken at the end of this, if there is a specific action that's needed.
Yes.
And often from that, when you do get feedback, you can go back to that goal and say, I'll tell you why I haven't done that, or I've done it that way because in our initial conversation, you mentioned that you wanted this to happen. You wanted this to be the goal, and that's why I've done it like that. And quite often, that will alleviate any pushback because they'll know. Like I have 60 to 90 minute conversations with people before I start projects generally to really, really hone in on, what they're trying to achieve, what visual directions they like. I'll normally present people with some sort of mood board to begin with.
Mhm.
So I get the buy-in on what they like. It's really just to have a load of receipts at the end. You go, you told me that you like this, and this is the thing. But it's to get a buy-in for them. So they know at the end of our call, I know what they like. We've both looked at the same thing and they've told me they liked it. I've then explained how I can take that similar idea and apply it to what they want. So at the end of the call, before I've produced anything, we both agree what I'm about to go and do. Even though
Yep.
they can't see it, they both agree what I'm going to do. And actually, coming back to the last question about AI,
Mhm.
although it is generally pants at creating anything like good design, um, it's quite useful at building a quick concept.
Yep. Yep.
So you can throw out a quick concept and go, look, this is AI, by the way. Like I always be transparent when you use it as well, because Jesus, don't get into that. So like prompt a quick thing and go, right, listen, here's a quick mock-up of the kind of thing. It will look very differently to this when I've done my thing on it, but this is an idea of sort of color-wise where we could go with it. And is this the kind of thing that you're thinking of? And you can kind of get a bit of buy-in on a visual direction and a goal direction. You should always just get people's buy-in before you start working on something. So they know before you end the call exactly what it is you're about to go away and do. So there's never any surprises. The only time there should be surprises if people ask for surprises, which is rare. But
Yep.
sometimes people will say to me, Dave, just do your thing. And
Nice.
and almost 9 times out of 10, that doesn't end up going well. I rarely do it because even though people say it, they don't really mean it.
Yeah, it's funny. So, I remember this, and I think this is an important lesson the other way around for marketers who are looking to speak with graphic designers or folks when you are briefing them in. I used to make this mistake all of the time with our in-house graphic designer that I
Yeah.
would go to them and sort of say, I'd like a brochure that looks like this. Can you go and do it? And actually, you know, the lesson that she taught me over a series of interactions, and we found ourselves in a really nice place with it, was, I'd come to her with a problem, like you said at the beginning of your answer there, and sort of say, well, I think I'd like to achieve this. And actually, the outcome that she produced was a billion times better than anything I could have briefed in terms of a solution. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think it goes both ways, whether or not you're the person creating the graphic or the person briefing it in, that sort of problem point, I think is a really, really strong one, Dave. So thank you. Let's go to the next question because it's gravitated to the top, which says, when designing a logo, do you build to a standard size, then make it fit spec, or the other way around? So I guess this is in terms of size of design.
Oh, well, logos are created in a file format known as vector,
Okay, of course, yeah.
which means they can be infinitely scalable. So you don't really create them to any sort of size.
Nice.
What you should do when designing a logo is create a responsive logo. So, for example, I might be able to show you an example actually. That might take too long to pull up. Um, Say, for example, you've got a company that has quite a long name, and then you've got an icon that sits alongside that, right? You would create a version, so that version will work perfectly for the header of a website, because
Mhm.
it's nice and long and thin. Great, but anywhere else it's useless. So you need to have versions that work. um, horizontally, vertically when they're small. So creating a responsive logo generally means you give people an option that just has a simple mark that can be used in like a profile image. You have an option that would work if they have like a square um, canvas to work a square, shape to fit the logo into. It'll still work. It'll still be legible. Whereas the long one would have to be tiny in the square one. You have a version that works on the long version. So you have a couple of different variations that people can use and a couple of different color variations. And the reason that I mentioned vector is you don't have to worry about size. So vectors are made mathematically as opposed to in pixels.
Yeah.
So if I want a logo to be the size of a pencil, to fit along the side of a pencil, it'll work. If I want it to fit on the top of a skyscraper, it will expand to that size and it will never lose clarity because it uses maths to calculate the angles and the lines and all that kind of stuff. So it can just infinitely scale them and change the ratios proportionally as you bring it up. So size is very rarely a factor because
Mhm.
you don't have to worry about it because of the vector format. And whatever you create different variations of the logo so it will work in multiple different scenarios because there are tons of different scenarios that a logo needs to sit into. So that's
Love that.
generally the thinking.
Bang on. Love that, Dave. It's the type of thing that like I've been in marketing for over 10 years now, and like while I'm aware of that kind of stuff and have even created them in the past, like my mind doesn't immediately go there. So even just having you sort of speak us through that is really, really fantastic. So thank you very much. Um, Dave, I'm gonna call it there because we've got some fab questions. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send them through to you, so you've got them for your own content if you want them. But I want to encourage folks to uh, just say hello to Dave on LinkedIn because his content today has been fantastic.
Please
But
do. I'm very lonely over there.
honestly,
Nobody
your
talks to me.
videos is really really fantastic. So
Oh, I've got
mate,
loads of connection requests, Joe.
have you? Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes.
I'm
Somebody,
pleased.
somebody wants to talk to me.
I love that so much. So I'm so glad. And please also do take the time to check out all of our sponsors, everyone, because without these sessions, without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring you these sessions. And so it's just a really, really important part of our community. So with all that said, Dave, you've been a hero. Thank you so much for taking us through
Thank you, mate.
everything.
It's been a pleasure. I just hope it's been useful for your fine friends that who have showed up to listen
I
to my horrific voice. But thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
think it really has been. What a legend. All right. Take care, everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks, unless you are joining us for the Marketing Meetup conference, in which case we'll see you Thursday. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you very soon. Cheers.